It's cold in here. But Shannon Bream, where she is, it's always warm. Take it from here, Shannon.
We're going to try to have a hot show tonight like you have as well, Laura. Thank you so much. Here's what we've got tonight.
Showdown on Capitol Hill, facing a deadline to give House Intel Chairman Devin Nunes the goods on the so-called dirty dossier. Top DOJ and FBI figures meet with House Speaker Paul Ryan. We'll have the latest developments as the war of words grows to a fever pitch between the head of the research firm behind the dossier and the GOP. And
furious, disgusted.
Titans tangle. President Trump battles his former top advisor, Steve Bannon. When it comes to Russia, is Bannon destroying his own credibility or the president's? We'll debate. Plus, the Big Four meet with top White House advisors, but not the president, who's taking a hard line on immigration. Former Trump advisor Steve Cortez predicts who will blink first. And they're calling her Iran's Rosa Parks, one of many women leading the uprising against the mullahs. So is the American left and feminist movement rushing to their defense or ignoring them? We'll investigate.
Hello and welcome to Fox News at Night. I'm Shannon Bream in Washington. New tonight in the feud between President Trump and his former chief strategist Steve Bannon. ABC News is reporting that President Trump is lawyering up against Bannon after excerpts from a new book were published in which Bannon speaks critically about Trump and his family. In one quote, accusing the president's son of treasonous behavior. Tonight, the president's lawyers are reportedly sending Bannon a cease and desist letter demanding he refrain from making disparaging comments against the president and his family. ABC News reports the letter says in part you, Bannon, have breached the agreement by, among other things, communicating with author Michael Wolff about Mr. Trump, his family members, and the company, the campaign, disclosing confidential information to Mr. Wolff and making disparaging statements and, in some cases, outright defamatory statements to Mr. Wolff about Mr. Trump and his family members. In the letter, Mr. Trump's attorney says that remedies could include but are not limited to monetary damages without naming a specific dollar amount. It caps a blistering day between the president and his former top advisor, who Mr. Trump says has, quote, lost his mind. The White House calls the book trashy tabloid fiction, but the author says he was given unfettered access inside the White House and completed more than 200 interviews. Doug McKelway joins us now with the latest on the war of words between the president and his once right-hand man, Steve Bannon. Doug?
Good evening, Shannon. Steve Bannon has lobbed perhaps the most explosive rhetorical grenade over the White House fence yet. The Wall Street Journal reports tonight that Michael Wolff's soon-to-be-released book called Fire and Fury inside the Trump White House includes this new Bannon quote, that presidential daughter Ivanka Trump is as dumb as a brick. That after a series of Bannon quotes from the book were leaked by the Guardian newspaper earlier in the day. One Bannon quote describes the Trump Tower meeting between the president's son and a group of Russians during the 2016 campaign as treasonous and unpatriotic. Bannon says of Special Prosecutor Mueller's team, they're going to crack Don Jr. like an egg on national TV. More on the Trump Tower meeting. Quote, they didn't have any lawyers. Even if you thought that this was not treasonous or unpatriotic or bad expletive, and I happen to think it's all of that, you should have called the FBI immediately. Bannon is also quoted on the Mueller investigation. Quote, this is all about money laundering. Mueller chose senior prosecutor Andrew Weissman first, and he is a money laundering guy. Their path to expletive Trump goes right through Paul Manafort, Don Jr., and Jared Kushner. It's as plain as a hair on your face. Donald Trump Jr. fired back late today on Twitter, quote, wow, just look at the comment section on Breitbart. Wow. When Bannon has lost Breitbart, he's left with, nothing. The president also unleashed a flurry of counterpunches at Bannon in an official White House statement. Quote, when he was fired, he not only lost his job, he lost his mind. Steve had very little to do with our historic victory, yet Steve had everything to do with the loss of a Senate seat in Alabama held for more than 30 years by Republicans. Steve doesn't represent my base. He only is in it for himself. Steve pretends to be at war with the media, yet he spent his time at the White House leaking false information to the media to make himself seem far more important than he was. The White House spokeswoman Sarah Sanders also blasted the book, calling it trashy tabloid fiction. The chairman of the American Conservative Union said tonight that Bannon is going to lose this barroom brawl.
I think Steve Bannon is an important voice, but I think he's greatly marginalized his voice because what this looks personal, this looks petty. It's about who did the most to help Donald Trump win. It's about revision, and it helps the left.
The book's author, Michael Wolff, was also given unusual access to the White House. He says he did over 200 interviews with White House and campaign staff. He's often been criticized, though, for inaccuracies. His book is slated for release next Tuesday. Shannon?
I wonder if it will sell many copies. Doug McKelway, thank you very much. Good to see you tonight. All right, so as we've been reporting, the president's attorney sending Bannon a cease and desist letter. Joining us now to talk about that and more, Isaac Wright, former executive director of the pro-Hillary Clinton Correct the Record Super PAC, and Alexandra Smith, the executive director for America Rising PAC. Great to have you both with us on a very quiet night in D.C. as the news breaks hour by hour. All right, so let's talk about some of these things. Doug had this quote that I want to read and have you guys react to. This is attributed to Steve Bannon. You realize where this is going. He's talking about the Russia investigation. This is all about money laundering. Mueller chose senior prosecutor Andrew Weissman first, and he is a money laundering guy. Their path to blanking Trump goes right through Paul Manafort, Don Jr., and Jared Kushner. It's as plain as a hair on your face. He went on to have some pretty nasty things to say about Jared Kushner. Isaac, not surprising. Those two did never seem to get along.
Yeah. They have had a long-running political feud, and it certainly seemed to spill over into this. I think the problem for Trump is that this is the beginning of the unraveling, right? We've had 4 indictments so far, a couple in his inner circle.
But not related to the Trump allegations of Russia collusion, just so we're clear. I mean, the Manafort stuff and the Gates stuff, that's money laundering and banking and all that.
Right, that was money laundering and banking prior to the campaign,
right,
with the same regime that supposedly meddled in our elections and with the same people that meddled in our elections as they were meddling in the Ukraine. The others, Flynn, I think, was indictment for lying to the FBI about potential collusion with Russia. The same thing with Papadopoulos. And those have both taken guilty pleas because they did relate directly to the campaign, so we'll see where it goes. This seems to be the beginning of the end for Trump. Now, what does that mean in the investigation? Does it actually lead all the way back to Trump? I don't know. Only time will tell. But it certainly seems that more, even in his inner circle, are starting to flee for cover. Even people like Steve Bannon, who's not exactly a beacon of ethics himself, because if you read closely what's been released of what he said, he didn't condemn that they did this, quote, treasonous, unpatriotic thing. He complained that they did it in a way they could get caught.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so Alexandra, he says it's over. It's over for the president. What do you say?
No, I don't know where it's going to lead back to him.
Beginning of the end, beginning of the end.
Beginning of the end of the investigation. It's going to unravel from here. I don't know if it's going to go back to the president or not.
The president, as you all know, sent a scorched earth policy statement out this afternoon. Here's part of what he said. He says, now that he's on his own, Steve is learning that winning isn't as easy as I make it look. Steve had very little to do with our historic victory, which was delivered by the forgotten men and women of this country. He points to the Alabama-backed Roy Moore by Bannon, him not winning and talking about other things that he says Bannon has overinflated and overexaggerated his importance to this whole thing. He's clearly trying to distance himself from him now.
Well, look, I think that Steve Bannon made the mistake of confusing President Trump's abilities for his own. And I think it's important to consider that with respect to Russia, we're really talking about 2 different things here. We have one, the formal investigation, a very important investigation that's going on. And then on the other hand, we have sort of this palace intrigue in D.C. It's very interesting, great gossip, great fodder for people like me and for Isaac and for you. But at the end of the day, I'm not sure that this is where the American people really have their attention. You know, the president was elected by the American people. Steve Bannon wasn't. So at the end of the day, I think they're looking for President Trump's agenda rather than at the, you know, supposed words of the hired help.
Okay, so some of what he's saying sounds very not positive for the president and for his administration. But I want to play a little bit of what he said back on 60 Minutes when he was still officially apart or had just separated from the White House and seemed still very much to be in the president's corner. Here's what he said back in September.
What do you mean what they believe? We don't really, I mean, that there may have been, I think, look, I was there. It's a total and complete farce. Russian collusion is a farce.
So, Isaac, that's what he said in September.
Right. So, and I think that's the really crucial thing about why this is more than just palace intrigue, why this is potentially criminal, because he raised the point in the book about the meeting where Kushner and Manafort and the senior-most circle around Trump at that time, it predated Bannon, went to a meeting with Russian officials under the auspices that they would be receiving opposition research on Hillary Clinton, that they would be receiving, quote, dirt on Hillary Clinton, something of a value, right? Because that had a monetary value. That would make it illegal had that transmission of a monetary value from a foreign government actually happened.
If the campaign had been offered the same thing, they would have showed up to a meeting?
No, absolutely not.
Okay.
Absolutely not.
Alexandra?
I mean, look, I think that the Hillary Clinton campaign would have shown up to a meeting like that. But, you know, here's...
You have to agree to disagree. As Isaac is...
I would be curious. You run a research organization. Would you show up to a foreign government offering you an illegal contribution?
Well, this is somebody who was not represented to them as an official representative of the Russian government. But of course, people say, you know, if you meet with anybody from the Russian government, you're probably meeting with somebody who has designs on you or has a motive.
Here's something to consider. I think that you can see through Steve Bannon's past statements that he has a vendetta out for the Trump children. I mean, look at in Alabama when he openly mocked Ivanka Trump on stage at the Roy Moore event. So he clearly has an agenda out for the kids. So it wouldn't be surprising to me that he would necessarily say these things about Don Jr. because we've seen his penchant for attacking the Trump children in the past. You know, that being said, I think look at the scorecard since Bannon has left the White House. On the one hand, we have tax reform that got passed. That's a huge victory for President Trump and the Republicans. On the other hand of the ledger, we have Steve Bannon, who, you know, hangs the Alabama Senate race.
But if I could finish the point I was making about that meeting in New York, that's where the bombshell is. It wasn't the fact that meeting happened. We knew it happened. We knew the intention that was laid out. That's all been documented. The emails have been turned over. Bannon made the point in the book. There's no logical way that the president's son-in-law, his campaign chief strategist at that time, Manafort, and the inner circle were going to a meeting to get secret dirt from a foreign government on Hillary Clinton, and Trump didn't know about it. That was the point that Bannon raised in the excerpt, that if true, is a bombshell.
Well, we'll see, because the president has denied, unfortunately we're out of time, but the president has denied he had any knowledge of it or any meeting about that. So if the facts prove otherwise, he'll have to answer that question. But for now, he stands by that. So we got to leave it there for now. But I'm sure there'll be another scandal erupting soon. So come back. Good to see you both.
Thanks.
Good to see you. Thanks so much.
All right, this is a Fox News alert on the other big showdown in Washington between the chair of the House Intelligence Committee and the DOJ. The Justice Department says it is ready to hand over documents regarding the Russia investigation to the committee as the deadline is closing in. The Republican chairman of the committee, Devin Nunes, had given the DOJ and FBI until tonight at midnight to hand over the documents and a witness list related to the so-called dirty dossier. That's that salacious, unverified report on President Trump's alleged activities in Russia before he was elected, compiled by a former British Secret Service agent. And now the House Intelligence Committee says it has reached an agreement to get what it asked for. It's looking forward to receiving the documents over the coming days. All this after the top DOJ and FBI officials met with Speaker of the House Paul Ryan today. Here's Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge to sort it all out for us.
Shannon, Fox News has also confirmed that the Deputy Attorney General and FBI Director requested and got a meeting today with the House Speaker about the Russia case. A short time ago, the Deputy AG Rod Rosenstein passed reporters without taking questions. All this as a key defendant launches a new line of attack.
According to the 17-page civil complaint, former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort and his legal team argue the Russia probe has gone beyond the scope of the special counsel regulations, calling Robert Mueller's investigation unmoored from the original mandate to investigate links and/or coordination between Russia and the Trump campaign.
There may be a fair legal question about the scope of the independent prosecutor's jurisdiction, but Judge Jackson will decide that. The judge that actually has the criminal case in front of her is the one who's going to have the final say on that.
In October, Manafort and his business partner Rick Gates pled not guilty to allegations of money laundering and making false statements for their work in Ukraine. The attorneys are now under a gag order, but said at the time there was no Russia connection.
Those activities ended in 2014, over 2 years before Mr. Manafort served in the Trump campaign.
Writing in the New York Times, the opposition research firm behind the unverified Trump dossier called on Congress to release transcripts of their closed-door testimony. The co-founders of Fusion GPS said they do not believe the dossier alone sparked the FBI Russia case. But Republican Senator Chuck Grassley called out the former journalists, who he says demanded the transcripts be kept confidential and refused to answer dozens of questions voluntarily. Grassley said the committee's invitation to testify publicly remains on the table. New details confirmed by Fox News raise questions about whether a May 2016 meeting between an Australian diplomat and a Trump campaign aide kick-started the probe. The former director of national intelligence said this week the campaign aide was not on his radar.
George Papadopoulos was not a name on my scope when I left now almost a year ago. I think it probably was one of several stimulants for the investigation, but was not the only factor.
Sources tell Fox the Australian government first made contact with U.S. officials in London about Papadopoulos and his claims Russia had damaging information on Hillary Clinton. But Australia's ambassador to the United States did not formally meet with the FBI until after the Democratic Convention, which ended July 28th. The hacked emails were already public.
On the Manafort suit, the Justice Department called it, quote, frivolous, adding the defendant is entitled to file whatever he wants. There was no immediate response from the special counsel. Shannon?
Catherine Harris, thank you very much. 3 vice presidents on hand at the Capitol today. Vice President Mike Pence joined by former Vice Presidents Joe Biden and Walter Mondale at the swearing in of 2 new Democratic senators. The newly minted senators are Doug Jones of Alabama and Tina Smith of Minnesota, who is replacing Al Franken. In an executive order tonight, President Trump abolishing the commission he appointed to study voter fraud. The panel was designed to put together a systematic analysis of voting data coast to coast in order to get credible statistics on voter fraud. But it became mired in lawsuits by states that did not want to hand over the requested information. We talked about it with Kansas Secretary of State and Commission member Chris Kobach last night. Well, the White House says the Department of Homeland Security will determine the next course of action on voter fraud. North and South Korea reconnect via hotline that's been dormant for years, talking twice today. We've got details on that and the latest offer from South Korea on peace talks. Plus, Iran's supreme leader insists it has defeated what he calls the sedition and that anti-government protests are under control. Is there any truth to that? We'll dig in. And a frustrated traveler opens an emergency exit on an airplane. We're going to tell you what happened next right after this break. Kim Jong-un, in his New Year's speech, said that the nuclear button is on his desk at all times. President Trump responded with his tweet that his nuclear button is bigger and more powerful than the North Koreans, and so it goes, as the Hermit Kingdom has recently reopened communications with South Korea and actually may send a delegation to next month's Winter Olympics in Pyeongchang. National security correspondent Jennifer Griffin on the aftermath of the tweet and the latest on the standoff on the Korean Peninsula.
Shannon, no official reaction from the defense secretary to the president's tweet about how big his nuclear button is. But certainly there are concerns the president's tweet ratchets up the mano-a-mano brinkmanship and could interfere with efforts by South Korea's president to engage North Korea in talks. So far, North Korea has not officially accepted the invitation of South Korea's president, despite Kim Jong-un having proposed talks in his New Year's address. South Korea has proposed those talks be held in the border village of Panmunjom next Tuesday. China's foreign ministry responded to the president's tweet this morning.
Currently, the situation on the peninsula is sensitive and complex. We hope all parties concerned can remain restrained. What is said should be conducive to alleviating the situation, and what is done should help the early resumption of dialogue.
North Korea resumed a hotline with South Korea, which has been used twice in the last 24 hours. That hotline had been down since last February. I am told there was more movement seen at known ballistic missile bases as recently as this morning. Last week, the intelligence community started seeing movement near Pyongyang that suggested North Korea was prepping for another ICBM launch. That test was expected to take place this week. I'm told by well-placed U.S. defense sources here at the Pentagon, North Korea's research and development schedule is likely to be fast-tracked to fix the problems encountered during that last intercontinental ballistic missile launch, which was higher than ever before but failed on re-entry. I am told that there are signs the test could be delayed, perhaps because of the anticipated talks between North and South Korea, but there is also a feeling among intelligence analysts that Kim would like to come to the table with an even more advanced capability. I'm also told if North Korea does not begin dismantling its nuclear program, that the U.S. will take preemptive military action in the coming months. The situation remains delicate. Shannon?
Jennifer Griffin for us at the Pentagon. Thank you. Well, the Iran Revolutionary Guard insists tonight it has defeated what it's called the sedition and that anti-government protests are under control. More than 20 people have died during more than 6 nights of the unrest in Iran, and Reuters is reporting there are fresh protests in some cities tonight. comes as thousands attended pro-government rallies to counter the unrest. Analysts say many of them are government workers. Iran's supreme leader on Tuesday blamed the original protests on meddling by Iran's enemies. Joining me now to talk about that and more, Lanhee Chen, a Hoover Fellow and former policy director for Mitt Romney's 2012 presidential campaign, and Jonathan Wachtel, the former press secretary for Ambassador Nikki Haley. Great to have both of you with us tonight.
Good to be with you, Shannon.
Okay, I want to read a little bit of what we're getting from the head of the Revolutionary Guard so we can address that. We'll start there. He says, tonight we can announce the end of the sedition. There were a maximum of 1,500 people in each place, and the number of troublemakers did not exceed 15,000 people nationwide. A large number of the troublemakers at the center of the sedition who received training from counter-revolutionaries have been arrested, and there will be firm action against them. Lanhee, where do we go with that statement? Does that square with the numbers of what you've seen? I mean, social media was shut down. It's tough to know accurately about numbers and people and what continues.
It is difficult, Shannon, to know exactly. One thing we always knew was that the Iranian regime was going to strike back, and they were going to strike back hard. So this should be no surprise that they are taking this action, that they are advertising this action. I think one of the challenges with the current uprising is that it doesn't really have a singular leader in the same way that the uprising in 2009 had, the so-called Green Revolution, and, of course, the original Islamic Revolution back in the late 1970s. So this particular set of protests is a little bit more diffuse. It lacks a central leader. It originally started as an anti-corruption, sort of anti-economic policy sort of set of protests, and now has morphed into a general anti-government set of protests. So we'll have to see what happens. But there is no question that the Iranian regime has the power to set down whatever revolution, whatever sort of protest there might be, and they're exercising that power now.
And Jonathan, Ambassador Haley has said the people are crying out for freedom, and it's up to us to stand with them. How does that translate logistically, practically? What can we do?
A couple of things. First of all, even saying that is a departure from what we witnessed in 2009 when the Obama administration pretty much ignored the Green Movement and left those poor protesters to the crack forces, the Revolutionary Guards, who just demolished them and slaughtered so many. It's a vicious cycle. So even coming out and speaking out against this and letting the Iranian regime know that they're on watch, knowing that the United States is paying attention this time is such an important thing. Now, the other thing that Ambassador Haley has announced is that she is pushing for a Security Council meeting. Now, that is going to be a little bit difficult given that Russia and China are members of the Security Council, and those are two countries who are not known for being liberal democracies and actually have a track record of crushing dissent in their own countries. So I wouldn't anticipate too much traction within the Security Council, but even bringing it to the attention of the Security Council, trying to get a meeting in place, it remains to be seen when that meeting might take place. It remains to be seen in what format that meeting would happen. It's difficult to gauge at this point. Now, the other things that can happen here is that you can also push very hard to try to get some sort of sanctions on the books, to pay attention to what's happening on the ground, to pay attention to who the crack forces are, who the Interior Ministry people are who are breaking people's heads and crushing the rebellion in Iran, so that you can actually go after these people, put them on notice, blacklist them, try to get something done so that they answer for their crimes.
Yeah, and I believe it was the head of the UN's Human Rights Council that said he expects Iran to take notice of what's happened and actually investigate any deaths or serious injuries. So we'll see, but it is clear now the world is watching. I want to ask you all quickly about North Korea. We're just about out of time, so Lanhee, I'll ask you. We're now hearing about open conversations, this hotline that had been not used really between the two countries, North Korea, South Korea, is now functioning again. They're talking nicely about the Olympics and other things. What do you make of it?
Well, the danger here, Shannon, is that what Kim Jong-un is trying to do is to drive a wedge between South Korea and the United States. Obviously, South Korea, our ally, our partner in all of this. Their goal here, it seems like Kim Jong-un might be trying to say, look, we're going to work with the South Koreans and try to run counter to what U.S. policy might be. That's why it's so important for the U.S. to keep pressure up, to continue to try to get China, for example, involved and engaged in this situation, which they have been more so since President Trump took office.
All right, we're out of time. We're going to leave it there. But Lan He and Jonathan, great to see both of you tonight. This topic will continue. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, coming up, the face of Iran's anti-government protests. This young lady is being dubbed Iran's Rosa Parks, but there's more to her story. And are the women behind Iran's protests getting their due credit? And where in the world is there a legal war on fake news? We'll tell you. Plus, the immigration showdown on Capitol Hill continues. The Trump administration doubling down on calls for a border wall, or they say no deal on DACA. And later, get prepared for the bomb cyclone. Extreme weather could be heading your way. Adam Klotz is in the Extreme Weather Center. Tell us more.
Shannon, it's called a bomb cyclone because we're looking at a low pressure system and the pressure continues to drop as it moves up the coast. It is going to explode. I'll tell you what that means coming up after the break.
A mixture of snow and freezing rain hitting parts of the south tonight. A monster winter storm moving up the east coast. Some are calling it a bomb cyclone. Fox News meteorologist Adam Klotz joins us live from the Fox Weather Center in New York to explain. It sounds terrible, Adam.
Yeah, Shannon, there were folks in northern Florida over the earlier hours today seeing some snowfall down into southern Georgia. That same system now running up the coast. We're beginning to see some of that snow falling across the Carolinas, stretching up into Virginia, even areas like D.C. beginning to see that snow. Still several hours away before New York City gets it, but it will be happening through the overnight hours as this system, it's a quick mover, continues to lift its way on up the coast. Obviously, the temperatures are cold enough that this is coming as snowfall at this point. Let's put it into motion for you. Pay attention to the time stamp as we track this moving up the coast. It really looks as though through the overnight hours we begin to see it in New York City, but pay attention to the track of this. It does get closer to the coastline as it travels to the north. That means more snow the farther north and east you go. So Boston likely to see 6 to 12 inches. You run up into Maine, maybe even more than that. So as you head that direction, do expect that conditions continue to get worse. Otherwise, there's plenty of other issues with this. We've got winter watches and warnings stretching all the way from the mid-Atlantic, running up into Maine, again, an area that's going to see the absolute worst of this. It's not just about that snow. It's also about the winds. You start to see some of these deeper colors, and we're talking about 50 to 60 mile an hour winds. That's going to be an issue. And finally, I'll leave you with this, Shannon. Obviously, very cold for us tomorrow, the next couple of days here in the east. But I know we've got a lot of folks on the West Coast. I know they're watching. They're enjoying it. Look at those numbers in the 70s. I would love to be out there right now.
I would, too. And that's normally what my parents have down in Florida. But it snowed there today where they were. You mentioned the Panhandle. They were pretty excited about it, though. I guess if you don't get it all the time, it is pretty exciting.
Yeah, not for me.
I hear you, Adam. Thank you very much for the update. All right, new year, new laws. Like the self-serve gas law in 36 Oregon counties. Oregon and New Jersey, they've long been the only two states that prohibit motorists from pumping their own gas. Now, some of the reaction has been pretty funny. A 62-year-old in Oregon admitted he didn't know how to pump gas. And a lot of people saying, I don't want to smell like it either. As you can see, the internet was merciless in its response, with one Wisconsin resident writing, "It's not that hard, people." Quirky new laws. Well, it's no secret California Governor Jerry Brown and some state lawmakers are no fans of the president, most notably the new tax law and the president's push to cut down on illegal immigration and chain migration. Trace Gallagher reports that those Golden State lawmakers are fighting back. Trace.
Shannon, in California, which has by far the nation's largest illegal immigration population, it is now against the law for police to ask people about their immigration status or to participate in federal immigration enforcement actions. California lawmakers have openly said the law is in response to President Trump's immigration agenda. There was no mention of President Obama deporting more illegal immigrants in each of his 8 years than President Trump did during his first year. In sponsoring the sanctuary state bill, California Democratic State Senator Kevin De Leon cited this Texas dashcam video of a mother pleading with a state trooper not to deport the father of her child. Watch.
Is he the dad?
Yeah.
Does he have a visa? Can you send a border patrol agent over here?
Oh, they're gonna take it, sir. They're taking the room of it.
De Leon called the video heartbreaking, though he failed to mention the heartbreak endured by the family of Kate Steinle, who was killed by an illegal immigrant, or of the numerous families who lost loved ones to illegal immigrants driving drunk. Immigrations and Customs Enforcement has blasted California lawmakers for putting politics over safety, quoting, "Disturbingly, the legislation serves to codify a dangerous policy that deliberately obstructs our country's immigration laws and shelters serious alien criminal offenders." California is also working to circumvent the administration when it comes to taxes. Under the new federal tax law, residents are only allowed to write off $10,000 in state and local taxes. But California lawmakers believe that unfairly targets high-tax states. So they're now proposing that residents be allowed to pay the first $10,000 of their tax bill and make a charitable contribution to the state for the rest. So in other words, California still gets all of its money, but taxpayers would then get to write off the entire amount. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo also believes the new tax law is unfair to his state, but instead of looking for a loophole, Cuomo is looking to sue the feds, accusing them of double taxation. Shannon.
Standing by. Where in the world? In about 90 seconds, Irish police are investigating a deadly stabbing for possible terrorism. A Japanese man was stabbed to death, 2 others injured in separate attacks. An 18-year-old Egyptian has been arrested. He had been seeking asylum in Ireland, according to police. A prominent lawmaker becoming one of the first hit by new hate speech laws in Germany. Beatrix von Storch leads Germany's anti-immigrant Alternative for Germany party, and she got in trouble for slamming the Cologne police for sending a Happy New Year's tweet in Arabic. After directing some controversial comments about Muslim men at the Cologne police, Twitter froze her account, and now the police have filed a criminal complaint against her for hate speech. French President Emmanuel Macron is declaring legal war on fake news tonight. Media providers would be forced to comply with new transparency rules still being formulated, and the government would have the power to cancel broadcasting rights in France. The death toll from a bus crash in Peru rising to 51, making it one of the deadliest accidents in Peruvian history. The bus ran off a narrow stretch of highway known as the Devil's Curve after colliding with a tractor trailer. And in Spain, a Ryanair passenger reacting to a series of delays by opening the emergency exit door, you know you've thought about it, and stepping onto the wing and then sitting down. In an apparent protest against the rigors of travel, he was talked back into the plane and then arrested by Spanish police. Well, the immigration showdown on Capitol Hill continues. The Trump administration doubling down on calls for a border wall or no deal on DACA. Later, the face of Iran's anti-government protests, this young woman's being dubbed Iran's Rosa Parks. But there's a lot more to her story. And are the women behind Iran's protests getting their due credit? Congressional leaders today saying they need further discussions to resolve multiple issues in order to come to an agreement on a spending bill. The Trump administration doubling down this morning on its position that there will be no deal on the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA, unless funding for the border wall is included.
There is no DACA without funding for the wall. The wall is to be built. He made that promise. It's begun. It's incredibly important for folks to see tangibly that we are getting tougher on border security.
Joining me now, Fox News contributor and former Trump Hispanic Advisory Council member Steve Cortez. Good to have you with us tonight, Steve.
Good night. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so what do you make of this? Because listen, you know what the Democrats' position has been over the last few months. Like, you're not getting your funding if we don't get DACA. The president says you don't get DACA if I don't get my wall, and if I don't get more, getting rid of the visa lottery and chain migration, all these kinds of things. I mean, is there anywhere they're going to meet in the middle?
I think eventually they will. Look, elections have consequences, and the Republicans, and particularly Donald Trump, were very clear on this issue in 2016. Listen, I was part of the campaign, and I will tell you that I don't think any single issue resonated with voters quite as starkly as this one did about building the wall and securing our southern border. So this was a promise made, and it's going to be a promise kept. Regarding DACA, I think the president has shown great compassion. What President Obama did was tried to act like a king, and by executive edict, he tried to wave his scepter and make law on his own. That's not the way it works in the United States. Now we're doing it the right way with the Congress. So I do want these DACA young adults protected. The president showed compassion in extending this deadline so that we can work out a compromise. But something has to come back in return. That's the art of the deal. That's politics. And what should come in return? I think it's two things. It's restrictions on chain migration, and it's resources for the border. Both of those are foundational principles of the Trump movement.
Okay, interesting that DHS Secretary Nielsen was asked about whether or not the president foresees a path to citizenship for these dreamers. Here's what she said. Right. I think he's open to hearing about the different possibilities and what it means, but to my knowledge, there certainly hasn't been any decision from the White House. That wasn't a no. You know that upsets a lot of people who they followed this campaign with the president who talked about cracking down on illegal immigration and sending people home, building the wall. If they hear there's even a hint that the president would agree to a path to citizenship in this scenario, you know the base is not going to be happy.
Right. No, listen, I think that's true. I would also say this, though, Shannon, in the president's defense. If he does make that decision, and I don't know where he's going to land on it, but if he does, the DACA people are a different category of illegal immigrant. They just are. They didn't choose to break our immigration laws. They were brought here as children. And so I think that they should be treated differently than other illegal immigrants who do not deserve a path to amnesty or to full citizenship at all. My advice to the president for even these DACA folks is that they should be allowed to stay, but not a path to citizenship. And I think, by the way, one of the reasons the Democrats insist on that isn't because they have such great compassion, they just want to see them as citizens. It's because they want their votes. And the Democratic Party has been very crass on this issue. They want as much amnesty for as many people as possible because they believe those they amnesty will then vote for them in return. And so I think we need to stand on principle. And by the way, when I say stand on principle, I also mean the principle of protecting legal immigrants. People like my father who went through the very difficult process, expensive, time-consuming process to become a legal American. It's incredibly disrespectful to them to say that others who do it illegally can hop the line and still somehow become citizens.
Yeah, and I think that there are some misperceptions. A lot of people just maybe assume wrongly that these are all people that are fleeing violence in South and Central America. But really, when you look at it, these DACA people are from all over the world. We have people who've come in through Iran and Pakistan, Venezuela, come into the U.S. from those countries. So there's a lot more to this conversation, I think. I want to read something from FAIR, which is the Federation of American Immigration Reform. They say this: the DACA program was illegal, but it was also bad from a long-term policy perspective. Rewarding people who violate our laws only encourages more people to become lawbreakers. Not a lot of time there, but I want to give you a chance to respond to that point.
No, listen, I do get that point. It would be like the IRS saying we're not going to punish people who cheated on their taxes for the last few years. Well, you're encouraging them to cheat going forward. So I think that's a fair criticism. I would say this, though, just briefly, is that it should sunset. This cannot continue. If the DACA people are protected, these young adults, it has to be enshrined in law that there will be no more of this going forward because we can't encourage people exactly to break our laws.
Yeah, well, you know, a lot of people feel that way about President Reagan back in the 80s. So we'll see how this plays out. There's a lot more negotiating to do. Steve, great to see you.
Thanks for having me.
All right, historic protests in Iran led largely by women. More on their stories just ahead. And Motel 6 sued. Details on the looming legal battle over this one, you won't believe it, next.
Turning over the names of your own guests, in some cases leading to people being detained. For the life of me, I can't understand what possessed Motel 6. So you'd have to ask Motel 6 their motivations.
Washington State's Attorney General is suing Motel 6. Attorney General Bob Ferguson is accusing the budget hotel chain of disclosing the personal information of thousands of guests to federal immigration authorities. Ferguson says the motel's actions were illegal, and at least 6 guests were detained after information from more than 9,000 guests were released. Well, some of the most striking images coming out of Iran recently feature women, including that one young woman that folks have dubbed Iran's Rosa Parks, standing atop a container shedding her required head covering. While the photos become iconic, even if there's some question over when it was taken and whether she was actually participating in the current protests, most folks saying that's not the case. Still, she's become a symbol. And some say the media and prominent feminists here are ignoring Iran's women, while others argue the media is overplaying their role. So what do we know? There are many images coming out of Iran of women marching without their headscarves and boldly demanding change. We have seen what we've been able to get out of the country. Let's talk about it with Daniel Halper, contributing editor for the Washington Free Beacon, and Alex Eisenstadt, a reporter for Politico. Gentlemen, good to see you tonight.
Great to be here.
Okay, so there's been a lot made over the fact that a lot of attention was paid by Hollywood and others on the left and feminist scholars and with the women's marches here in this country. But really not hearing a lot from folks on the left about these women who are standing up in Iran, where they literally could lose their lives, Alex, over what they're doing.
Well, look, for people who are allies of former President Barack Obama, it's sort of a tough needle to thread here because President Trump and others on the conservative side have been critical of the way he handled Iran, and have specifically said that some of the ways in which he dealt with Iran may have led to some of the current problems there are today. And so it's a tough situation. You also have a situation where President Trump is sort of going out there and has offered real rhetorical support for the protesters, has been much more forceful in speaking about this than President Obama was at the time. So a lot of people who are allied with President Obama perhaps don't necessarily want to get caught in the middle of this at this point.
Yeah, but if these are people who are all about women's rights and screaming about potentially losing birth control and all these things that are not true and are not going to happen, you'd think that when women who are actually risking jail time in their lives and their families, that there would be some response. But here's something interesting that we did get from a political commentator from Huffington Post. He tweeted out, Alex Mohajer, the Iranian protests, the resistance, and the Women's March are all the same. Across the world, people are fighting autocracies and oppressive regimes. Real Donald Trump is no different than the oppressive ayatollahs in Iran, Daniel.
Well, that's obviously ridiculous and offensive. I think it drives to the larger questions. The question that you were asking earlier is, why aren't the left taking the side of the people protesting? And I think it's because Trump has, and because they hate Trump so much that they're unable to see straight, and they're unable to see morally who's the right and who's the wrong. And it's this confusion, I think, that's disallowing them to take a clear stance, stand with people who want freedom, who are protesting, who are clearly in the right. And I think it's just their hatred of Trump that they're unable to get past. And it's really too bad, because this really could be a unifying moment where you could envision where you could have conservatives and liberals and Donald Trump, Barack Obama coming together and supporting people, Iranians who want freedom. Instead, it's divisive, just like everything else, it seems.
I feel like as a woman in this country, I've got a lot of freedom. I can vote, I can drive, I can make my own decisions and own property and do whatever I want. So to act like what's happening in this country is equated to people where they literally will be killed for things that we can do every day, it's hard to understand. So on the moral relativism, Meghan McCain on The View said this: I just think having any kind of conversation about moral relativism in a country where we couldn't be sitting here without our heads covered, where gay people are literally murdered and stoned to death in the same streets, and comparing it somehow to what's going on in the United States of America, for me, when we have these conversations comparing the United States to Iran, that's where I end conversations and where I just leave, because it is ridiculous. Alex?
Yeah, look, I mean, I don't think too many people are actually comparing what we have in the U.S. To what there is in Iran. But it's going to be interesting to see what else President Trump says about this. We've seen him weigh in a few times on Twitter in the last few days. He's clearly on the side of the protesters at this point. But it's going to be also interesting to see if he speaks before the cameras on this. Today, of course, is all taken up by Steve Bannon. But perhaps we're going to hear more about how he feels about Iran in the coming days.
Do you think the left comes around on this, Daniel, to being more supportive?
I would like to think so, but it just doesn't seem likely. Alex pointed out that Barack Obama was very quiet in 2009, the last time there was uprising in Iran, and the uprising went away and the regime, of course, stayed in power. Obviously, if this turns into some sort of serious revolution and the regime is overthrown, I think perhaps that changes things. But if it maintains its somewhat status quo, I don't think the left will cross the barrier and decide to side with Donald Trump.
Well, the head of the Revolutionary Guard says tonight they have quelled the sedition and it's over. But Reuters says there are more protests tonight, so we'll keep an eye on it. Yeah. Great to have you both.
Thank you
for coming in. All right, the deep freeze is not stopping those eager to get a slice of Powerball's 10th biggest jackpot ever. We're going to have the winning numbers for you. Ooh, I better get my tickets out. That's next.
These are the winners. Okay.
This is a Fox News alert. Steve Bannon just answering a caller's question a short time ago on Sirius XM radio about this feud he's having with the president. Well, Bannon said this, quote, "The president of the United States is a great man. You know I support him day in and day out." Meanwhile, Powerball offering its biggest jackpot since it awarded more than $757 million last August. Here are the numbers: 2, 18, 37, 39, 42, and then the 12. So if you had it, you're $460 million richer. If not, keep playing. All right, most watched, most trusted, grateful you spend the evening with us. Good night from Washington. I'm Shannon Bream.